Hi guys, Samantha from Jessama Tutorials here, and today I'm going to teach you how to avoid or remove fingerprints on your polymer clay creations. So, first step to avoiding fingerprints is to wear gloves. And so I'm just going to pop on a pair quickly. There we are. And now I know gloves are a little bit annoying to some people and I don't tend to use them a lot, but they really do help when avoiding fingerprints. So for instance, if this was one of your finished pieces as far as beads go, you could now take your gloves, so let's just straighten this out, make sure we don't have too many crinkles. Take that and gently roll. And this is going to remove fingerprints on round beads. So when you are creating the round beads, this is what I suggest doing. I suggest always having gloves on when you're about to roll them, and you'll see that that has removed all the fingerprints, versus one here that I rolled by hand. You can see hopefully that this one has less fingerprints than this one. So whenever you're making round beads or any sort of bead like this, you want to be wearing gloves. So that is one way of avoiding fingerprints. And then of course when you're working with veneers and you're busy pressing on them, using gloves, it's going to create almost zero fingerprints. But let's say you do have fingerprints on a veneer that you want to cut out your polymer clay. Let me just show you those fingerprints. You will grab a piece of greaseproof paper. You can use baking paper, wax paper, deli paper, anything, and just take your roller and gently burnish. And this works for something that you haven't cut out yet, because this will distort the shape a little bit. So if you've already cut out your bead, this is not the way to go. And there we go. Let me pick that up and show you. And you can see how beautifully that has removed all of your fingerprints. So that is your second way of doing it. Okay, and now let me just take off these gloves because they're getting in the way. But let's say you have fingerprints on your beads, and gloves aren't really going to help with that. So here is one where I have some fingerprints on them, so hopefully you can see there. So the method that I prefer to use and tend to use is I actually will take my finger and I will gently burnish almost by hand. I'll just smooth. And you're always going to need to sand. Don't think that this removing fingerprints before you bake negates the need to sand. You will always need to sand. So don't think that this is going to remove that need. It's just going to lessen the amount of work. So there we are, we can see that the fingerprint has gone. We will need to sand that though, but that has removed fingerprints. Another way of doing it, so for instance this one has some has a streak down the middle here. We are going to try and remove that. And so one way of doing that is to actually have a water pen. You will fill this part with water, and here you can see that the brush is nice and wet. And we're just going to squeeze gently, and that is going to bring some water down. We're going to see if we can use this brush to help smooth this out. And now this is only going to help so much. I've got another way of removing really thick pieces, but if you don't want to use your fingers to smooth out fingerprints, this is a really good way of doing it. I tend to just use my fingers, but if you're having trouble with it, the brush will do a very good job. The water just smooths it all out. You're still going to need to sand, but this still does a really good job. And a water pen is just a cool thing to have. You can always use it with your paints and pastels and things like that. So it's just something cool to have. Okay, and I'm just quickly going to dry that off. And we've lessened the amount of damage there is on there, but we still don't have a really nice smooth surface. So I'm just going to let that dry completely, and then I can show you the next step. the next step is going to be to use liquid clay. Now ideally you want to make sure that you don't have these sorts of things on your clay, because it's just better to not have to use liquid clay. So generally I wouldn't actually have this, but let's say you did. So long as it is not an organic piece. If it is an organic piece, I just say that it is better to leave this here, because generally you won't actually see it in an organic piece. For instance, here is a white howlite piece that I have. It's got a nice sand, but all of these little cracks, they add to the organic nature of the piece. Same with something like this. You can see that we've got a bunch of bumps and things like that. A little bit of scratches and fingerprints aren't going to make too much difference in something like that. But if you wanted to sand this and make it really nice and wanted a shiny finish, grab a little bit of translucent liquid clay and brush over the surface. And this is essentially going to fill in that section. And when you're doing this, you will want to put this across the entire surface of your bead. Now this scratch is quite deep, so again, as I said before, this is your last this is the last ditch attempt to fix it, but generally it's just better to not let it get to this point. You want to burnish your veneer like I showed before. You want to wear gloves. You want to be able to try and smooth it out with your fingers before you get to this point. But if you do get to this point, here is a way to fix it. But again, this is not going to give you the best results. The best results will be achieved by avoiding this entirely. And in this case, always use translucent liquid clay, because the colours will obviously affect your project. And I'll just cover my entire piece, and you want to be doing a really thin layer. Make sure that the streaks are all going in the same direction, like so, and try and get a really nice even coat. Okay, there we go. Now you would put that in the oven, but I want to show you what it looks like when I heat gun it, so you can see the transition with the liquid clay. So I'm just going to grab my heat gun, but you would still ordinarily you would pop this in the oven and bake at your normal temperature for the normal length of time. There we go. And now that can be a little tricky for some people. That is why I don't recommend the liquid clay technique. But if you do manage to get it, it can actually be a win-win on your part. It will hide that scratch pretty well. And it will also do the varnishing and sanding for you. You now don't need to do any sanding or varnishing on this piece, because you can see how beautiful and shiny it has come out. So if you don't have a heat gun, you can pop this in the oven at the normal temperature and bake for the normal length of time. But if you do have a heat gun, it's best if you can heat gun it like I've done now, and then bake it for the normal length of time, because you'll end up with a shinier finish. But you can see how beautiful that has come out. So I'm just going to pick up a piece with my blade. Okay, and you can see at the back is still raw. And so that's why I would say that you need to bake it. But again, you can see that that scratch is pretty much completely gone. But ideally, it is better to make sure that you don't have any scratches. And if you wanted to use liquid clay as a varnish, you could, but it's just best not to use it just to hide things. But anyway, so I hope that tutorial was helpful to you as far as removing your fingerprints. These are the techniques that I use when it comes to removing fingerprints, and it works pretty well. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below the video. If I have an answer to them, I will leave you a link to a video or an article. But if I don't have a video or article, I will answer them as best I can, and I'll also add them to the list of videos and things I need to do so that I can get that answered as best I can. So leave questions in the links below, and if you have suggestions for videos like this where you have a question and I need to do a video on it, please leave it in the comments below. And as always, I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.